The Vampire King's fiancée slapped the waitress. What he did next shocked the restaurateur. Cruelty, my dear, is often just terror wearing a very expensive coat, the man said, his voice a low hum that vibrated through the crystal stemware. He didn't look up from his wine, the red liquid swirling like a trapped storm. And silence, the woman replied, her hand trembling as she reached for the linen napkin, is just a scream that has learned to be polite. It was a Tuesday in the city of Oakhaven, where the rain smelled of ozone and old secrets. Inside the obsidian bloom, the air was warm, smelling of roasted quail and fear. No one knew that within the hour, a dynasty would fracture over the sound of a palm striking a cheek. The restaurant was less a place to eat and more a theatre, where the wealthy pretended they weren't starving for something other than food. The walls were lined with dark velvet, absorbing the murmurs of the city's elite, senators, moguls, and the occasional nightwalker who had paid enough to forget they were dead. Leonette adjusted the collar of her uniform. It was stiff, scratching against the sensitive skin of her neck. She had been working at the Obsidian Bloom for 6 months, long enough to know the rhythm of the dinner rush, the specific clink of heavy silverware against bone china, and the way the air pressure dropped when he walked in. Draven Stormburn. The Vampire King didn't strut. He flowed like ink spilled across a map. He was ancient, though he looked no older than 35, with eyes the color of a bruised twilight. Beside him walked Noeletta, his fiancée by treaty rather than affection. She was a vision in silver silk, a woman whose beauty was weaponized, sharp angles, and a smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. Brennan Goldvale, the maitre d', practically vibrated with anxiety as he led them to the secluded booth in the back, the king's table. Brennan was a good man, terrified of his own shadow, and tonight his hands shook as he handed off the menus. "Leonette," Brennan whispered, catching her arm as she passed with a water pitcher. "Table 4. Be invisible." "I'm always invisible, Brennan," Leonette murmured. She wasn't bitter. She was factual. With her messy brown hair tied back and her plain features free of makeup, she was part of the furniture. Or so she thought. She approached the table. Draven was staring out the window at the rain-slicked streets, ignoring Noeletta, who was dissecting the menu with a sneer. "Water?" Leonette asked, her voice steady. Draven didn't move. Noeletta looked up, her gaze raking over Leonette with immediate, inexplicable hostility. It was the way a predator looks at a rival, not prey. "Do not speak unless spoken to," Noeletta hissed. Her voice was high, crystalline and sharp. "My apologies," Leonette said, pouring the water. Her hand was steady, practiced. She placed the crystal goblet down. "You're hovering," Noeletta snapped, "and you smell like rust." Leonette paused. "It's the rain, miss. Don't contradict me." Noeletta's fingers curled around the stem of her wine glass. Draven turned his head slowly. He didn't look at his fiancée. He looked at Leonette. For a second, the ambient noise of the restaurant, the jazz piano, the laughter, the clatter, seemed to vanish. He looked at her not as a servant, but as a puzzle. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring slightly. "The soup," Draven said. His voice was gravel and silk. "The truffle consommé. For both of us. And the wine list," Noeletta demanded, her eyes flashing. She turned back to Leonette. "And fix your hair. You look like a street rat trying to play house." Leonette felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she bowed her head. "Yes, miss." As she turned to leave, her elbow grazed the edge of the table. It was a phantom touch, barely a whisper of contact, but it was enough. The heavy silver salt shaker wobbled and tipped, spilling a granular white line across the dark mahogany table. The silence that followed was absolute. Salt. To a superstitious vampire lineage, spilled salt was an omen of betrayal. To Noeletta, it was an excuse. "You clumsy, filthy little thing," Noeletta shrieked. She stood up, the motion fluid and violent. Before Leonette could apologize, before Brennan could rush over, Noeletta's hand lashed out. Smack! The sound was shockingly loud, a thunderclap in the hushed room. Leonette's head snapped to the side. The force of the blow staggered her, sending her stumbling back against a serving cart. A tray of empty glasses shattered on the floor, a cacophony of destruction that echoed the stinging burn on her cheek. The entire restaurant froze. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. The piano player stopped mid-chord. Leonette touched her cheek. Her fingers came away with a smear of blood, not from the slap, but from where her tooth had cut her lip. She looked up, her eyes wide, meeting Noeletta's triumphant glare. But Leonette didn't cry. She didn't beg. A strange, cold calm settled over her features. She straightened her spine, wiping the blood from her lip with the back of her hand. "I will fetch a cloth for the salt," Leonette said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its subservient lilt. Noeletta raised her hand again. "You will get on your knees and—" "Enough!" Dreven said. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't stood up. He merely spoke the word, and the air in the room grew heavy, crushing the breath out of everyone's lungs. The pressure in the room was physical. It was the weight of centuries, the aura of a predator that had suddenly decided to stop playing with its food. Dreven Stormburn slowly stood up. He was tall, unfolding like a shadow, lengthening at sunset. He smoothed the front of his charcoal suit. He didn't look at Noeletta. He walked around the table, the sound of his dress shoes on the hardwood floor, echoing like a metronome counting down to an execution. Noeletta smirked, smoothing her dress. She expected him to defend her honor. She expected him to demand the waitress be fired, or perhaps, given their nature, dragged out to the alley. "Dreven, darling," she began. "She assaulted me with her incompetence. The salt." Dreven walked past her. He didn't even blink as he bypassed his fiancée completely. He stopped in front of Leonette. She was trembling now, the adrenaline fading into fear. She looked down, unable to meet the ancient depth of his eyes. The red mark on her cheek was vibrant, a stark contrast to her pale skin. Dreven reached out. Brennan Goldvale gasped from the sidelines, covering his mouth. The king's hand, cold as marble, hovered near Leonette's face. He didn't strike her. He didn't grab her. With the tip of his thumb, he gently brushed the tear that had escaped her eye, catching it before it fell. Then he did the unthinkable. He brought his thumb to his lips and tasted the tear. His eyes widened slightly. A flicker of genuine shock passed over his stoic face. He looked at Leonette, really looked at her, seeing past the uniform and the fear. "You are bleeding," Dreven said. "It is nothing, sir," Leonette whispered. "It is not nothing." Dreven turned to the room. The patrons were statues, terrified to breathe. He looked at Brennan. "Mr. Goldvale?" Yes, Your Majesty," Brennan squeaked. "Bring a chair," Dreven commanded. "Place it here." He pointed to the spot directly across from his own seat at the table. "Sir?" Brennan blinked. "But Miss Noeletta is sitting—" "Noeletta is leaving," Dreven said calmly. Noeletta's jaw dropped. "Excuse me? Dreven, you cannot be serious. Over a waitress? A servant?" Dreven finally turned to her. His expression was bored, tired. "You struck her. You drew blood. And in doing so, you insulted the hospitality of this establishment. And by extension, you insulted me. You lack the temperament of a queen, Noeletta. You have the temperament of a spoiled child, breaking toys because she is bored. Your father will thank me for not tearing your hand off, for embarrassing me. Dreven cut her off. Go, take the car. I will walk home. Noeletta turned a shade of purple, then white. She looked around the room, realizing she had no allies here. With a strangled cry of rage, she grabbed her clutch and stormed out, her heels clicking furiously against the floor. Dreven turned back to Leonette. Brennan had brought a chair. Sit, Dreven said. I can't, Leonette stammered. I'm working. I'll be fired. Dreven looked at Brennan. Is she fired, Mr. Goldvale? Brennan shook his head so hard it looked like it might detach. No, absolutely not. She is on break. Indefinite break. Paid. Sit, Dreven repeated, softer this time. Leonette sank into the chair, her legs giving out. She sat across from the vampire king in her stained apron, the shattered glass still glittering on the floor nearby. Dreven sat back down. He reached for the bottle of wine, poured a glass, and slid it across the table to her. Drink, he said. It will help with the shock. Leonette stared at the wine. Why? She asked, her voice raspy. Why did you do that? Dreven leaned forward, his elbows on the table, interlacing his fingers. The heavy silver rings on his hands caught the dim light. Because, Leonette, he said, saying her name as if it were a forgotten language he was relearning. When you bled, the scent changed. Leonette froze. Her hand went instinctively to the locket hidden beneath her uniform. What do you mean? I mean, Dreven whispered, leaning in so only she could hear, that the blood on your lip does not smell like a human's. It smells like ozone. It smells like the storm. He picked up his fork. Now, tell me who you really are, before the rest of the room realizes there is a wolf sitting in the sheep's clothing. The wine tasted like cherries and iron. Leonette drank it because her hands needed something to do. I don't know what you're talking about, she lied. She was good at lying. She had been lying for 5 years, ever since the fire at the Abbey. Dreven watched her with amusement. The tension in the restaurant had shifted. The patrons had resumed eating, but the volume was lower. Everyone was stealing glances at the impossible tableau, the king and the server dining together. You lie with the grace of a diplomat, Dreven noted. But your pulse betrays you. It's hammering against your wrist like a trapped bird. Sedan. A man materialized from the shadows near the kitchen door. Sedan Highbrook. Leonette knew him as a regular, a quiet man who sat in the corner reading newspapers from 3 decades ago. He was tall, wearing a trench coat that looked like it had seen wars, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. Your Grace, Sedan said, bowing slightly. Clear the floor, Dreven said, gesturing to the shattered glass, and escort Miss Leonette's manager to the kitchen. I wish to speak to her without managerial oversight. Sedan nodded and ushered a relieved Brennan away. You have a guardian, Dreven stated, not asking. Someone who taught you to hide your scent. Witchcraft or simple alchemy. Leonette set the glass down hard. My name is Leonette. I am 23. I live in the East District. I pay my taxes. I serve soup. That is who I am. And the mark on your shoulder? Dreven asked. The one shaped like a twin-tailed comet? Leonette went cold. The uniform covered her shoulders completely. There was no way he could see it. How? I have excellent vision, he said dryly. And the fabric of your uniform is cheap polyester. It becomes translucent under certain spectral gazes. He took a sip of his wine. 5 years ago, the House of Vane was eradicated. Burned to the ground by hunters. They were a unique lineage of vampires, daywalkers, or close to it. They could withstand the dawn for an hour or two, dangerous, powerful. Leonette griped the table edge. They were monsters. They ate people. Propaganda. Draven dismissed. They were political rivals to the council. They were slaughtered, every single one. Except, rumor had it, the youngest daughter. A child of mixed blood. Half vampire, half something else. He pointed a fork at her. You slapped that salt shaker. You didn't knock it over. Your reflexes were too fast for a human, but you corrected them mid-motion to look clumsy. You anticipated Noaletta's strike. You rolled with it. Yet you let it land. Why? Because if I dodged, Leonette whispered, her eyes burning, she would have known I wasn't normal. And if she knew, she would tell the council. And the council would kill you, Draven finished. Yes. But you let me see, Draven said softly. I didn't let you see anything. You're just invasive. Draven laughed. It was a rusty, dry sound. Perhaps, but now we have a problem. Leonette of the East District. Noaletta is petty. She will not let this go. By morning, she will have dug into your background. She will find the holes in your fake identity. She will find your guardian. Millicent, is it? Leonette stood up, the chair scraping loudly. Leave Millicent out of this. I cannot, Draven said, because Noaletta has already texted her father's private security. They are likely heading to your apartment now to find leverage to get you fired and arrested. Leonette's face drained of color. She threw her napkin on the table. I have to go. You won't make it, Draven said. You are on foot. They are in armored SUVs. I have to try. She turned to run, but Sedan Highbrook blocked her path. He wasn't menacing, just solid. Let me pass, she growled, her eyes flashing a momentary, terrifying gold. Listen to him, kid, Sedan said gently. Draven stood up again. He tossed a heavy black credit card onto the table. Brennan, he called out. The maitre d' popped his head out of the kitchen. Add the damage to the glass and the salt to my tab, and wrap the soup to go. Draven walked over to Leonette. He took off his heavy wool coat, it cost more than she made in a year, and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of sandalwood and power. You are not going back to your apartment, Draven said. We are going to pick up Millicent, and then you are coming to Stormburn Manor. I'm not your prisoner, she snapped, though she pulled the coat tighter. No, Draven agreed, opening the door for her as the wind and rain howled outside. You are my fiancée. Leonette froze on the threshold. What? Noaletta is gone, Draven said, stepping out into the rain, unbothered by the water soaking his silk shirt. The position is open, and if you are to survive the week, you will need diplomatic immunity. The only people with immunity are the royal family and their betrothed. He looked back at her, offering his hand. So, Leonette, will you serve soup, or will you rule the monsters? Leonette looked at his hand. She looked at the dark street, where blue lights were already flashing in the distance toward the East District. She took his hand. This isn't a yes, she warned. It's a start, Draven said. As they stepped into the waiting limousine, a figure watched them from the alleyway across the street. Odalissa, another waitress from the Obsidian Bloom, pulled her phone out. Her eyes were entirely black, no whites, no irises. She dialed a number. He has her, Odalissa whispered. The bait has been taken. And then she smiled, revealing teeth that were far too sharp for a human. The limousine didn't just drive. It sliced through the Oakhaven rain like a great black shark, navigating the pressure of the deep. Inside, the cabin was a hermetically sealed capsule of leather and hushed technology. the silence louder than the 12-cylinder engine purring beneath them. Leonette sat pressed against the cold window, her breath fogging the glass. Her waitress uniform, stained with the phantom memory of spilled consommé, felt like a costume from a life she had already lost. Across from her, Draven Stormburn was absorbed in a dossier displayed on a translucent tablet. The harsh blue light sculpted the planes of his face, emphasizing the cruel architecture of his cheekbones and the ancient, weary set of his mouth. He looked less like a man and more like a statue, carved from grey marble, animated by a terrifying will. "You're shaking," Draven said. He didn't look up. His finger swiped across the screen, dismissing lives and laws with a gesture. "My aunt," Leonette managed, her voice tight, vibrating with the adrenaline that hadn't left her since the restaurant. "Millicent. She's blind, Draven. She lives in a 4th-floor walk-up with locks a child could pick. If Noalette's men get there first—" "They won't," Draven said, his tone final. He finally lifted his eyes, the irises a shifting storm of charcoal and violet. "Sedan is already on site. He is efficient, and he owes me a debt that blood alone cannot repay." The car swerved smoothly, leaving the glittering high-rises of the Central District behind. They entered the East District, a graveyard of industry where the streetlights flickered with the desperation of cheap electricity, and the rain smelled of rust and wet ash. Here, the buildings leaned precariously over the street, skeletal fingers grasping at the smog-choked sky. They pulled up to a tenement building that seemed held together by grime and spite. But the street was not empty. 3 black SUVs, unmarked and idling with predatory intent, blocked the entrance. Men in tactical gear were clustered around the front door, Noalette's private cleaners. They moved with the jerky, aggressive coordination of hired thugs who enjoyed their work too much. "Stay," Draven commanded. The word was not a request. It was a physical weight. He opened the door and stepped out into the deluge. Leonette watched through the tinted glass, her heart hammering against her ribs. Draven didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked into the rain with a terrifying, languid grace, unbothered by the water soaking his silk shirt. He adjusted his cufflinks as if walking into a boardroom. One of the tactical officers turned, raising a suppressed assault rifle. "Private property! Back off or we—" Draven merely raised a hand, palm open, fingers slightly curled. The air pressure dropped instantly. The officer flew backward as if hit by a freight train, his body ragdolling through the air before crashing through the windshield of the lead SUV. The safety glass shattered into a million diamonds. The other men froze, their weapons wavering. It wasn't magic in the fairy tale sense. It was the sheer kinetic pressure of a vampire, ancient enough to bend the physics of the air around him. "You are trespassing," Draven said, his voice low but cutting through the storm. "And you are boring me." The front door of the tenement creaked open. Sedan Highbrook emerged, calm as a monk in a hurricane. He held a black umbrella over a small, frail woman with snow-white hair and dark, wraparound glasses. Millicent. She walked with a silver-tipped cane, her chin held high, looking unbothered by the violence radiating around her. She wore a coat that had been fashionable 40 years ago, and she carried herself like a queen in exile. Leonette scrambled out of the car, ignoring Draven's order. Her feet splashed into a puddle of oil and water. "Aunt Millie!" Millicent paused, tilting her head like a bird, listening for a worm. "Leo, you're early, and you've brought company." She sniffed the damp air, her nose wrinkling. Expensive cologne, ozone, rotting leaves, and blood. Royal blood. Old blood. Draven approached them, the rain seeming to curve around his silhouette, leaving him strangely dry. "Millicent Vane, it has been a long time. You look remarkably preserved for a woman supposedly dead since the equinox of 99. Millicent's grip on her cane tightened, her knuckles white. Not long enough, King Stormburn. I assumed you'd finally come to finish what your council started. Are you here to burn the rest of the family tree? I am here to stop the pruning, Draven said, his eyes scanning the rooftops. Get in the car. Your apartment is compromised. Noeletta has authorized a cleaning. She intends to erase Leonette's history, starting with you. A cleaning? Millicent scoffed, allowing Leonette to guide her toward the limousine. That girl always did lack imagination. She uses a hammer where a needle would suffice. As they bundled Millicent into the plush interior of the car, the air cracked. A gunshot rang out, not the boom of a handgun, but the wet thwip of a high-caliber sniper, round suppressed by tech and magic. The back window of the limo shattered inward. Draven moved faster than thought. One moment he was standing by the door. The next, he was a blur of motion inside the cabin. He threw himself over Leonette and Millicent, his body becoming a shield. A second round struck the doorframe, sparking violently. "Drive!" Draven roared at the partition, his voice losing its human cadence and dropping into a guttural growl. The car screeched away, the tires smoking on the wet asphalt as the driver engaged the evasive protocols. The heavy vehicle fishtailed, clipping one of the black SUVs before roaring down the alleyway. Leonette pushed herself up, checking Millicent frantically. "Are you hurt? Did they hit you?" "I'm fine, child," Millicent said calmly, adjusting her glasses with trembling fingers. "Though I believe I've left my favorite tea kettle on the stove." She paused, her face turning grave. "You, my dear, you've made a deal with the devil, and devils always collect their due before the sun comes up." Draven settled back into his seat, brushing a shard of tempered glass from his lapel. A thin line of blood trickled down his cheek where a shard had grazed him. He wiped it away with a thumb, his eyes glowing a faint, predatory crimson in the shadows of the car. "We are not going to the safe house," Draven said to the driver, his voice cold steel. "Take us to the manor. If Noeletta wants a war, she can come knock on the front door. I am done hiding in the alleys." Leonette looked at him, seeing the shift in his energy. The boredom was gone. "You're enjoying this," she accused, horror dawning on her. "We almost died, and you're energized." Draven looked out at the shattered window, watching the city blur by in streaks of neon and grey. He smiled, and it was a terrifying thing to witness. "Peace is boring, Leonette. It is a stagnation. But chaos." He inhaled deeply, as if smelling a fine wine. "Chaos reveals the truth, and tonight we shall see who truly holds the knife in this city." Stormburn Manor wasn't a house. It was a fortress, built into the jagged granite cliffs overlooking the churning grey ocean, miles north of the city limits. It was a brutalist masterpiece of concrete and glass, hanging over the abyss like a predator waiting to drop onto its prey. The waves crashed against the rocks below, a rhythmic booming that vibrated through the floorboards, a heartbeat for a house of the dead. Inside, the manor was suffocatingly silent. It wasn't the peace of a home. It was the silence of a museum, or perhaps a mausoleum. The air was cool and smelled of beeswax, old paper, and the salt spray of the sea. "You will stay in the east wing," Draven told Leonette, as they walked through a vaulted hallway lined with portraits. The ancestors of the Stormburn line looked down at them, men and women with pale skin and eyes that looked like they had died hungry. "Millicent will be in the guest suite below. It is accessible, guarded by my personal detail and soundproofed." "I want to stay with her," Leonette argued, clutching her arms. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her cold and exposed. No, Draven said, stopping in front of a massive oak door carved with scenes of wolves hunting stags. You are my fiancée now. Appearances matter. If you sleep in the guest quarters, you are a guest. If you sleep in the Queen's suite, you are a threat. You need to be a threat. He pushed the door open. The room was larger than Leonette's entire apartment. One wall was entirely floor-to-ceiling glass, looking out over the storm-tossed sea. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the whitecaps. A massive four-poster bed sat in the center, draped in silks the color of midnight. On the bed lay a box wrapped in black velvet. Leonette froze. "What is that?" "A gift," Draven said, his voice devoid of emotion. "From Noeletta. It arrived 10 minutes ago via courier. My security scanned it. It's not a bomb, biological or otherwise." Leonette approached the bed cautiously. Her hands shook as she untied the silver ribbon and lifted the lid. She gasped, recoiling violently. Inside, resting on pristine white satin, was a dead canary. Its neck had been twisted at an unnatural angle. Shoved forcefully down its open throat was a ring, a diamond engagement ring, Noeletta's ring. "She's insane," Leonette whispered, covering her mouth. "She's actually insane." "She is thorough," Draven corrected. He walked over, picked up the box, and closed it with a sharp snap that echoed in the room. "She is telling you that you are a songbird in a glass cage, and she knows exactly how to silence you. It is a crude message, but effective." "I can't do this," Leonette whispered, backing away until she hit the cold glass of the window. "I'm a waitress, Draven. I drop salt shakers. I worry about rent. I can't play politics with monsters who kill birds just to make a point." Draven set the box down and turned to her. For the first time, his expression softened. The crimson faded from his eyes, leaving them a weary grey. He looked tired. Centuries of tired. "We are all monsters, Leonette. Some of us just wear better suits and drink from crystal goblets." He walked to the window, staring at his reflection ghosted over the storm outside. "My engagement to Noeletta was a treaty. It was the only thing stopping a civil war between the Stormburns and the Iron Circle, her father's faction. By breaking it, I have restarted the clock on a massacre." "Then why did you do it?" Leonette asked, stepping closer. "Why save me? You don't know me. I'm nothing to you." Draven turned, and the intensity of his gaze pinned her in place. "Because when you slapped that waitress, I didn't slap her, she slapped me." "When you took the slap," Draven corrected, stepping into her space. "You didn't flinch, you didn't cry out, you didn't beg. I watched your pulse in your neck. It didn't spike with fear, it spiked with calculation. You weighed the cost of retaliation against the cost of survival, and you chose silence. That is not the reaction of a victim, Leonette. It is the reaction of a strategist, and I am surrounded by impulsive children and ancient gluttons. I need a strategist." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't diamond or gold. It was a band of black iron, heavy and rough, set with a stone that shifted color like oil on water, obsidian, then violet, then deep green. "This is the Stormburn seal," he said quietly. "It is an artifact from before the treaties. It masks your scent. As long as you wear this, you smell human. If you take it off, every vampire within 10 miles will smell the vein blood in your veins. They will hunt you." He took her hand. His skin was cool, dry, and terrifyingly strong. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, tightening slightly, as if it were alive, bonding to her skin. "Tomorrow night is the Equinox Gala," Draven said. "We will announce the engagement. Noeletta will be there. Her father, Lord Varkas, will be there. They will try to break you. They will try to make you scream, cry, or run. What do I have to do? Leonette asked, looking at the black iron on her finger. It felt like a shackle, but also like a shield. Draven smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that showed too many teeth. You have to be the one thing they don't expect. You have to be worse than them. As he left the room, the heavy door clicked shut, locking with a magnetic thud. Leonette walked to the window, staring into the dark. In the reflection of the glass, she saw something behind her. A shadow. Not hers. She spun around, her heart seizing. The room was empty. But on the nightstand, where the box with the dead bird had been, there was now a single white rose. The petals were bleeding fresh, red blood onto the marble surface. Someone was already inside the house. The ballroom of Stormburn Manor was a cavern of gold and shadow. Chandeliers made of actual diamonds dripped light onto the crowd below, refracting the scene into a kaleidoscope of wealth and malice. The music was a live string quartet, playing something that sounded like a weeping angel, beautiful, melancholic, and deeply unsettling. Leonette stood at the top of the grand staircase. She had been transformed. Gone was the waitress in the polyester uniform. In her place stood a woman in a dress of midnight blue velvet, backless and severe, clinging to her form like a second skin. Her messy brown hair was swept up in an intricate weave of braids, exposing the long, vulnerable line of her neck, a deliberate taunt to a room full of predators. "Breathe," Draven whispered beside her. He offered his arm. He was wearing a tuxedo that seemed to absorb the light, cut to perfection. "Fear tastes like vinegar to them. Don't be sour." "I'm not scared," Leonette lied, her stomach churning. "I'm nauseous." "Good. Use it. Let the disgust fuel you." They began the descent. The conversation in the room died instantly, severed as if by a blade. 300 pairs of eyes turned upward. Some were curious, some hungry, most hostile. The air in the room grew heavy with the scent of expensive perfume, old dust, and the metallic tang of bloodlust. At the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Standing in the center of the floor was Noeletta. She looked like a war crime in a ball gown. She wore crimson silk that looked like an open wound, and her smile was a jagged shard of glass. Beside her stood her father, Lord Varkas, a man who looked like a hawk made of leather and malice, leaning on a cane topped with a silver skull. "Draven!" Varkas boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "And the help!" A ripple of cruel, tittering laughter went through the room. Leonette stepped forward before Draven could speak. She remembered Millicent's training in the cramped apartment kitchen. Posture is armor. Silence is a weapon. "Lord Varkas," Leonette said, her voice projecting clearly without shouting, steady and cool. "I suppose the help is an upgrade from the hostage, which is what your daughter was. A political pawn traded for a peace you clearly have no intention of keeping." The laughter died instantly. Varkas's eyes narrowed, the skin around them tightening. "Charming," Varkas sneered, stepping closer. "Draven, you have picked a stray with teeth. But does she have blood?" Varkas snapped his fingers. A waiter appeared instantly with a silver tray of crystal glasses, but instead of wine, the glasses were filled with a thick, viscous, dark red liquid. "A toast," Varkas announced, raising a glass. "To the happy couple. But of course, tradition dictates the bride must share the cup. Unless she is too human to stomach our vintage." It was a trap, a public test. If she drank it and vomited, she was weak, a human toy. If she refused, she was an outsider, rejecting their culture. If she drank it and liked it, questions would be asked about her humanity. Draven tensed beside her, his muscles coiling. "Varkas, this is unnecessary." "It is tradition," Noeletta chirped, stepping forward with a glass, her eyes dancing with malice. "Drink, darling, or are you afraid you'll catch something from us monsters?" Leonette took the glass. The crystal was cold. The smell hit her immediately. Copper, iron, death. It was synthetic blood, potent and concentrated, used to intoxicate vampires. To a human, it should be emetic. She looked at Noeletta. "I'm not afraid of a drink, Noeletta. I'm afraid of what you might have put in it. Given your history with salt." She tipped the glass, but she didn't drink. With a flick of her wrist, she poured the thick red liquid onto the floor. It splattered across Noeletta's pristine crimson shoes, soaking into the silk. "Oops," Leonette said, her face a mask of deadpan innocence. "Clumsy me. It must be the nerves." The room gasped. This was not a faux pas. It was a declaration of war. Noeletta shrieked, her face contorting from beauty into something feral. "You filth!" She lunged. It wasn't a slap this time. Noeletta's fingernails elongated into razor-sharp talons, aiming straight for Leonette's jugular. Draven moved to intercept, but he was blocked by Varkas, who slammed his cane down, creating a shockwave that staggered the king. Leonette didn't have time to think. She didn't have time to act human. As Noeletta's claws descended, instinct screamed louder than survival. Leonette threw her hand up, palm out. She didn't touch Noeletta, but the air between them twisted. There was a sound, like a cracking whip, a sonic boom in the confined space. Noeletta was thrown backward, as if hit by a cannonball. She flew 10 feet through the air, crashing into the buffet table in an explosion of pastries, crystal, and shattered glass. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Leonette stood with her hand raised, her chest heaving. The black iron ring on her finger was burning hot, searing her skin. She had used a vain ability, kinetic rejection. Varkas stared at her, his jaw slack. That was not human reflex. Draven stepped to Leonette's side, gripping her arm, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "She is under my protection, Varkas, and she is full of surprises." "That was magic," Varkas hissed, pointing a trembling finger. "Or something worse. She is an abomination." Eddied away from her by the crush of the panicked crowd. "Leonette, stay down!" In the darkness, Leonette scrambled on the floor, glass cutting into her palms. She felt a presence behind her. Something cold pressed against her neck. It wasn't Draven. "Hello, little comet," a female voice whispered in her ear. It was familiar. Odalissa, the other waitress from the restaurant. "Time to go home to the real family." A needle pricked Leonette's neck. The world spun into vertigo. The last thing she heard was Draven roaring her name, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage that shook the very foundations of the manor, before the darkness swallowed her whole. Consciousness returned to Leonette not as a flood, but as a slow, agonizing drip. Her head throbbed in time with the distant sound of dripping water. The smell of ozone and expensive cologne was gone, replaced by the scent of rust, damp concrete, and antiseptic. She opened her eyes. She was strapped to a metal chair in the center of a circular room. The walls were lined with white subway tiles, cracked and stained with age. Above, a single industrial light bulb buzzed like a trapped insect, casting long, jittering shadows. "You have a high metabolism for sedatives," a voice said from the shadows. "Most humans would be out for another hour. Then again, you aren't really human, are you?" Odalissa stepped into the light. She was no longer wearing the waitress uniform of the obsidian bloom. She wore tactical black gear, her hair slicked back, and her eyes, those terrifying black-on-black eyes, were sharp with intelligence. She held a syringe in one hand and a tablet in the other. "Where is Draven?" Leonette rasped. Her throat felt like it was filled with glass. "The king?" Odalissa laughed, a hollow sound. "He is likely tearing the city apart, block by block. He is predictable that way. Rage makes him sloppy." "You work for Varkas," Leonette said, testing the bonds on her wrists. They were zip ties, reinforced with wire. "Varkas?" Odalissa scoffed. "Please, that old bat thinks power comes from bloodlines and galas. I work for the Silence. We are the ones who clean up the messes the aristocracy leaves behind. And you, Leonette Vane, are a very messy stain on history." Odalissa pulled a rolling metal cart closer. On it sat a centrifuge and several empty vials. "The Vane lineage was supposed to be extinct," Odalissa explained, tapping the syringe. "Daywalkers, able to synthesize vitamin D from sunlight and convert it into kinetic energy. Do you have any idea how valuable your bone marrow is? Varkas wants you dead because you threaten his daughter's position. I want you alive because you are a renewable resource." She grabbed Leonette's jaw, forcing her head back. "Now, hold still. The first extraction is always the most painful." "If you touch me," Leonette whispered, her voice trembling but her eyes burning gold, "he will kill you." "He can't find you," Odalissa smiled. "We are 60 feet underground, in an abandoned metro station. The lead lining in the walls blocks all scrying, all tracking, and even that little ring he gave you." She brought the needle to Leonette's neck. Boom. The sound wasn't a knock. It was the ceiling caving in. Dust and debris rained down. Odalissa stumbled back, shielding her eyes. A massive slab of concrete, weighing tons, crashed onto the centrifuge, flattening it instantly. Through the hole in the ceiling, 60 feet up, a silhouette appeared against the stormy night sky. It dropped. Draven Stormburn landed in a crouch, the impact cracking the concrete floor of the station. He rose slowly, dust falling from his tuxedo like ash. His eyes were not just glowing, they were burning with a violet inferno. "You forgot one thing, Odalissa," Draven said, his voice echoing with a terrifying distortion. "I gave her the ring not just to hide her. I gave it to her so I could hear her heart beating." Odalissa didn't panic. She dropped the syringe and pulled 2 submachine guns from her belt. "Kill him!" she screamed to the shadows. Dozens of mercenaries flooded from the tunnel entrances, opening fire. The room became a strobe light of muzzle flashes. Draven didn't dodge. He moved through the hail of bullets like smoke. He appeared in front of the first mercenary, tearing the weapon from his hands and using it to club the man across the room. It was a blur of violence, limbs breaking, bodies flying, the sheer kinetic force of an ancient let loose. But there were too many of them, and they had UV rounds, bullets filled with concentrated ultraviolet phosphorescence. A round struck Draven in the shoulder, sizzling like acid. He roared, stumbling back. Another hit his leg. "Draven!" Leonette screamed. She pulled at her restraints, the zip ties cut into her skin, drawing blood. Odalissa saw Draven falter. She smiled, raising her gun. "The king bleeds!" she shouted triumphantly. "Finish him!" Draven fell to one knee, surrounded. He looked at Leonette, his eyes dimming. "Close. Your eyes," he wheezed. "No," Leonette said. Something snapped inside her. It wasn't a bone, it was a lock. The fear she had carried for 5 years, the fear of being found, the fear of being a monster, evaporated. In its place was a white, hot anger. She looked at the blood on Draven's shoulder. She looked at Odalissa's smug face. The mark on her shoulder, the comet, began to burn through the fabric of her dress. "I said no!" Leonette screamed. She didn't push with her hands this time. She pushed with her soul, A shockwave of pure, blinding light erupted from her body. It wasn't fire, it was sunlight, pure, concentrated, noonday sun generated from within her own cells. The zip ties melted. The metal chair disintegrated. The light filled the station, brighter than a nuclear flash. The mercenaries screamed as their UV goggles blinded them, their skin blistering instantly in the sudden, intense radiation. Odalissa shrieked, covering her face as her skin began to smoke. Draven, being a vampire, should have burned. But as the wave hit him, he looked up at her. The light didn't hurt him. It curved around him, caressing him, recognizing him as hers. Leonette stood up in the center of the devastation, glowing like a star come to earth. Her hair floated in a zero-gravity halo. Her eyes were solid gold. "You wanted a vein?" Leonette's voice was a chorus of harmonic resonance. "You wanted the sun?" She raised a hand. A beam of concentrated thermal energy shot from her palm, striking Odalissa. The spy was thrown backward, pinning her against the far wall, unconscious and smoking. The mercenaries dropped their weapons, fleeing into the dark tunnels, terrified of the living sun standing in the wreckage. The light faded slowly, leaving Leonette standing in the dim buzz of the remaining electric bulb. She swayed, the energy drain hitting her all at once. Draven was there instantly. He caught her before she hit the ground. He hissed as her skin, still hot to the touch, singed his tuxedo jacket. But he didn't let go. "You," Draven whispered, looking at her with a mixture of awe and terror. "You are not just a kinetic. You are a solar." "Is that bad?" Leonette mumbled, her head resting against his chest. Draven laughed, a breathless, broken sound. "It means you are the only thing on this earth capable of killing me. And yet, you missed." "I didn't miss," Leonette whispered, closing her eyes. "I chose." The return to the surface was silent. Sedan was waiting with the limousine, which looked like it had been through a war zone. He didn't ask questions. He took one look at the unconscious Odalissa in the trunk and the glowing heat radiating from Leonette, and he simply opened the door. They didn't go back to the manor. They went back to the obsidian bloom. It was nearing dawn. The restaurant was empty, save for Brennan, who was sweeping up the glass from the previous night's disaster. He froze when the door opened. Draven walked in, carrying Leonette. He placed her gently in the same booth where everything had started. Table 1. "Wine, Brennan," Draven ordered. "The 1920 vintage, and a steak. Rare. She needs protein." Brennan scurried away. Leonette sat up, wincing. Her wrists were bruised, but she felt strangely alive. The power hummed under her skin, no longer a hidden burden, but a ready weapon. "Why here?" she asked. "Because the gala is still going on," Draven said, checking his watch. "Varkas is currently giving a speech about my untimely demise and his daughter's tragic heartbreak. He is likely trying to seize the Stormburn assets as we speak." "And you want to stop him?" "No," Draven said, pouring 2 glasses of wine as Brennan returned. "I want us to stop him." He slid a glass to her. "The engagement was fake, Leonette, a shield to protect you. But that shield is broken. You are revealed. If you walk into that gala tonight, you walk in not as a fiancé, but as a target." "I'm already a target," Leonette said, picking up the glass. She looked at the red liquid. "I'm tired of hiding, Draven. I've hidden for 5 years. I've served soup to men who would kill me for my blood type. I'm done." Draven smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile with genuine warmth. "Then let us go and break the world." The doors to the Stormburn ballroom were thrown open with a telekinetic blast that shattered the hinges. Lord Varkas froze mid-eulogy. Noeletta, who had been dabbing fake tears from her eyes with a lace handkerchief, dropped her glass. Draven walked in, limping slightly, his tuxedo torn and bloody. But he looked triumphant, and on his arm walked Leonette. She wore the same blue velvet dress, now ripped at the hem and stained with soot. She wore no shoes. Her hair was wild, but she glowed, literally. A faint, golden bioluminescence radiated from her skin, casting shadows across the room. "I apologize for the interruption," Draven announced, his voice booming. "But reports of my death were optimistic." "Draven!" Varkas snarled, recovering quickly. "You bring that abomination back here? After she attacked my daughter? Security!" The Iron Circle guards moved forward. "Take a step," Leonette said softly, "and I will turn this room into a supernova." She raised her hand. A ball of concentrated sunlight, blindingly bright, formed in her palm. The vampires in the front row hissed, shielding their eyes, their skin smoking instantly from the proximity. Varkas paled. A solar? Impossible. They were wiped out. "You missed one," Leonette said. She looked at Noeletta. "And she is very, very tired of your tantrums." Noeletta backed away, terrified. "Daddy, do something!" Varkas looked at the sun in Leonette's hand, then at the predator's grin on Draven's face. He realized with sinking horror that the balance of power had not just shifted. It had been incinerated. "We demand a vote," Varkas stammered. "The council must decide." "There is no vote," Draven said, stepping forward to stand beside Leonette. He took her hand, interlacing his cold fingers with her warm ones. He raised her hand, the sunball extinguishing into a soft, golden glow that illuminated the ring on her finger. "This is Leonette Vane," Draven declared to the room, "head of the reborn House of Vane, and she is not my fiancée." The room held its breath. Draven turned to her, bowing his head slightly, a gesture of submission from a king to an equal. "She is my queen, and anyone who wishes to challenge her reign can discuss it with the sun." Leonette looked out at the sea of terrified faces. She saw Brennan in the back, smiling. She saw Sedan nodding, and she saw the fear in Varkas's eyes. She squeezed Draven's hand. "Table for two," she whispered to him. "For eternity," he replied. The scandal at the Obsidian Bloom became a legend, whispered in every corner of the underworld. They say the Vampire King didn't just fall in love, he fell into orbit. Leonette Vane didn't just survive the world of monsters, she illuminated it. They ruled not with fear, but with a balance of shadow and light, a king who owned the night, and a queen who carried the dawn in her veins. In a world of frozen hearts and spilled salt, they proved that even the darkest storms eventually break for the sun. Enjoyed the story? If this tale of forbidden power, royal intrigue, and shocking twists kept you on the edge of your seat, please like this story and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe for more dark romances and supernatural thrillers. What do you think happened to Noeletta? Let me know in the comments below.